just to say to those of you with us, welcome. Don't forget we're big fans of Twitter, so please use hashtag Insight2020. Please feel free to tweet throughout this process. You've joined us for our third event of the week, the third event of the festival of thinking about analysis and learning in health and care. Today we're focusing on better decisions through meaningful population involvement. So I'm gonna move on then. So first of all, and I'm hoping my screen's going to move for me. Yes. So first of all, a little bit of housekeeping. If everybody can keep their microphone muted during the session, that would be really helpful. Otherwise, we'll have to get draconian and go in and mute you. Please do use the chat box function to ask questions or raise technical issues with us. Myself and David Callahan will be keeping an eye on that, and so we'll try and pick up any technical issues as they go along. Asking questions, I've just checked with Kate and Michelle, our presenters for today from Ipsos MORI, and they've just said, can you keep your put your questions in and we'll come to them at the end. So hopefully there'll be enough time. They've got a lot to share with us today, so we just thought that might be better. The session is recorded, so be aware of that. I hope that's okay with everybody, and the links will be sent to registered participants afterwards. So again, quick reminder about tweeting. We love a bit of Twitter, so hashtag Insight2020 and tweet us at strategyunit_unit. So that's a little bit of housekeeping to start us off. And I'll get into the main important bit of my bit, is to say hello and welcome to Kate Duxbury and Michelle Mackie from Ipsos MORI. They are both eminent in their research directors at Ipsos MORI, and as one of their colleagues said to me today, Mike Laurie, he said these two research directors are at the top of their trade. There's probably not many people who can beat them in what they do. So we have a great relationship with Ipsos MORI at the strategy unit, and the more I work with these fabulous folk, the more I realise there are many parallels between us, the people, those of us that work with them, and the strategy unit. Their individuals are focused on making the world a better place and doing the right thing, something all of us are after, and I've no doubt shared that with people who are tuning in today. So Kate, you can see, is a mixed methods researcher with 15 years experience of health and social care research. Many of you will have come across Kate's work before and not realised it. She's behind the words on the Friends and Family Test question for NHS England. And recently, you might have come across her work with the Health Foundation, measuring the number of direct contacts people have had during COVID to inform modelling and identify where patients are attending A&E. And I'll just introduce you to Michelle, who's the head of Ipsos Dialogue at Ipsos MORI. Michelle oversees the public dialogue work as well as deliberative and participatory research concerning health, data and science. For the non-technical folk like me, I did a quick look up of this, and this is what's so interesting about their work today, and so important in this day and age that we're in, because deliberation is about the way means by which people consider relevant information from multiple points of view. It enables people to discuss the issues and the options and to develop their thinking together before coming to a view. I know many of you out there are dealing with difficult decisions, and these are methodologies that are going to be incredibly helpful going forward. The participatory research piece is again an approach and technique with the objective handing power from the researcher to the research participants, who are often members of the community. So again, really important in this day and age. As you can see, Michelle's recently led virtual deliberations since lockdown, and today she's here to share some of that learning about how you do that in an online environment. And neither of them know that I'm going to say this, but I think this just demonstrates the characters of Michelle and Kate. Michelle was once a beaver leader. She was towed from Wind in the Willows, And Kate, you don't get off scot-free on this one, Kate. I know that maybe I should be calling you Sergeant, as you're a cadet in your youth and a qualified obstacle course instructor. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I don't know if everybody was on the call with with Ben Goldacre on Monday, but many of you will know he asked everybody to turn their screens on and do this to show their appreciation for him and their excitement at him. So if everybody can turn their screens on just for this moment and do this to welcome Kate and Michelle, that would just be brilliant. Thank you. Over to you guys.
I actually think that might be the most bizarre start to a presentation I've experienced.
Brilliant.
I missed that. And everyone's wondering what happened to me now. I used to do obstacle courses. Now I sit at my desk. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Really happy to be speaking to you today. As Karen kindly introduced, we want to talk through some ideas for how the NHS can make better decisions through meaningful population involvement. And I just wanted to start off with some context to that. So we've talked about this a lot over the years. The public are hugely bought into the ideal of the NHS. When we do qualitative research with the public, it very much aligns to our values. We talk a lot about fairness, about equality. The NHS really typifies all of that. We're very proud of the NHS. It's a national treasure for us. And you can see that in some of these quotes here. So somebody saying it's highly important to have for generations to come, somebody else referring to it as a fundamental right. And in our polling, we find that 3/4 of the public think that the NHS is crucial to British society, and we must do everything we can to maintain it. And that has remained remarkably consistent over the years. And we find that's even more so now. Since the pandemic, we've been doing qualitative research, deliberative research that Michelle's been leading on. And we find that the public are very, very grateful to the NHS for coping. You can see from this data here that the public are confident in the NHS to deal with coronavirus, and increasingly so. We've seen the clap for carers. We hear from the public just the sympathy they have for people who continue to go to work at the moment, and respect for all of those staff and gratitude to them. Why is that important? It's the social compact, really. The NHS is there to serve people in the end, and that's what it was created for. And actually what we must do in order to serve the population right is to make sure we're taking into account their behaviours, their attitudes, and also their experiences when we're making decisions and we're making policies about how services should run. And I think I'm probably preaching to the converted since you've all joined us on this session. But this can actually be done, involving the public can be done to genuinely improve decisions. It doesn't have to be a tick box exercise. It can genuinely improve what the NHS can deliver. So Michelle and I today are going to talk through 4 different ways in which population involvement could help you. So we're going to look at making sure services reflect people's needs as patients. We're going to look at understanding in more detail people's attitudes and behaviours. We're going to look at how they can input into difficult dilemmas where there are trade-offs. And we're also going to look at measuring experiences so that services can be improved. Now, our partnership with the Strategy Unit, which we're very proud of, is all about evidence. It's all about collecting data and basing decisions on that evidence. So what we'll be trying to do today is just to give you some examples effectively of where we've done work that we think has been particularly impactful and where involving the population has had a meaningful impact on the outcomes. So we're going to try and share some examples with you of where we've done that. What we're going to talk through isn't comprehensive. It's not every single possible approach you could take to involving the population. For example, here we've shown a continuum of different approaches to involving the population, from engagement on the left-hand side through to research on the right-hand side. As a research agency today, we're going to focus on the research end of that spectrum. So the more scientific end, rather than your engagement, which is hugely important, but just not something we're going to talk so much about in today's session. And what we're going to do, rather than provide a comprehensive list of all of the different approaches that you could take, is to try and stimulate some ideas, talk about some more traditional approaches, talk about some more innovative approaches, and just get you thinking about how different approaches could be used to involve the population to help you with the challenges that you're facing in your roles day to day. So I'm going to start with the first area. So making sure services reflects people's needs as patients. Now, of course, engagement is a huge part of this, and there is a big co-design piece that happens around this. But one example I wanted to share with you is taken from what we call conjoint analysis. This is a very, very fancy statistical process where we try and model people's choices. And the idea behind it is that people don't behave rationally. They don't necessarily look at a whole series of information to make decisions. If you ask somebody straight, what's most important to you, is it X or Y? That really simplifies the question too much quite often with the number of things that our brains are processing. So conjoint analysis is a way of dealing with that. It basically presents participants with a choice and it forces them to choose, and then it systematically varies that choice across multiple tasks. Then this WYSI statistical modelling is used to look at how people are making decisions and to understand the trade-offs. Now, I can't imagine that makes much sense to you at the moment. So I'm going to share an example of where we did this a number of years ago in the West Midlands. And we were looking to understand the choice behaviour of women in the West Midlands when they were choosing their maternity units. So we did a face-to-face survey among a representative sample of women. And we showed respondents these series of choice tasks in order to try and understand what was underpinning their choice when they were choosing which maternity unit to use. And this is an example of what it looks like, of what the participants were seeing. So what you have here down the left-hand side is a series of what we call attributes. So these are the attributes that we worked out through qualitative research were really driving women's decisions, things that they were weighing up when they were making their decisions. So for example, you've got reputation, whether they received a recommendation from a professional, whereabouts the unit was located, the type of unit, so is it hospital-based or standalone, and then also the distance from home by car. And effectively, we show a woman, the participant, this set of choices. We ask them, which of these three would you choose? So you've got a choice of A, B, or C. Which of those would you choose? We then show them a series of those. So each participant would see about 10 different tasks, which puts different combinations of those attributes together and different combinations of these different levels. So not good or good reputation or centre of excellence. And by showing each person 10 of those, when we aggregate that up at the end, we get some great modelling, which I will talk you through. This approach at the moment is not used a huge amount in the public sector. This is one great example of where we've done it. Another example of where I've used it was in thinking about rolling out pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV in developing countries. So there we did conjoint analysis where we looked at where people would like to receive the pre-exposure prophylaxis, how they would like to be given it, how often they would need to have it, and those types of questions. It actually has its roots in marketing. So you can imagine here A, B, and C could be 3 different types of television with different attributes of television, and that would help the marketeers. But it absolutely has applications for our research in the public sector. So to demonstrate and try and get you seeing how this works, to be trading off all of the different elements of it, what I'm going to do is show you 3 choice tasks and just sit in there, have a look through them and think to yourself, if you were in the position of a woman or indeed a family choosing where to have a baby, which of these ones would you choose? So I'm going to start with this one. Move my pictures out of the way. So if you look at these, which would you choose? A, B, or C? Right, I can see some answers coming in, so I'm going to skip to the next one. Here's the second choice task. You get more used to it as you do more and more. It gets easier than the first one. So how about in this one, just think for yourself, which would you choose in this case, A, B or C? And last one. So what I'm hoping that's demonstrated to you, and the reason that I wanted to give you the examples to look at was when I was looking at it, you read through one of them and then a piece of information at the end changes your mind. And I think it shows that with some of these really complex decisions, it's not a straight trade-off between reputation and distance from home by car, for example. Your brain is looking at all of these different connotations to work it out. And so that means it gives us a really sophisticated way of looking at the choices that people make. And here's what we can show in terms of the outputs. So we show people two different scenarios, one where the pregnancy is high risk, one where the pregnancy is low risk. And so for the high risk one, you can see that the reputation of the unit was the most important thing in driving people's choices once we've done all of that sophisticated analysis. After that, the unit type is also important, followed by the distance. And you can see then quite a big difference between that and the low risk. So in the low risk case, the reputation is still the most important element. However, you can see that distance becomes more important in comparison with the high risk. And where unit type is really important for the high risk pregnancies, it becomes less important for the low risk. So it gives you a sense of what's more important to people in different scenarios. And then we can dig into those even further. So this is, it looks complicated, and I'm not going to talk through all of the numbers and what they mean, but this is for the high risk example. It shows you for each of these attributes, what plays into people's decisions. So if you look at the reputation, clearly not having a good reputation means that people are less likely to choose that option. So that's very important. However, what's interesting is between a centre of excellence and a good reputation, there's hardly any difference. So actually when women are making their choice, whether it's a centre of excellence or it's got a good reputation, have an equal impact on what choice people make, but it really falls off when you're talking about not having a good reputation. Similarly down here, if we look at the distance it takes to travel, so if you're travelling 5 or 15 minutes, then that pushes people towards choosing that option. However, once you've got that barrier between 15 minutes and 25 minutes, that really changes people's views and starts moving them towards not choosing that option. So in terms of how these kind of outputs can then be used, it means that you can see what factors are most important to people when they're choosing their service, and that helps you to design services according to that. And this more detailed output that I'm showing you here, again, it would help with service design to know what women are particularly looking for when they make their choices. And we're also working on another idea at the moment with the strategy unit, which will be modelling decisions, for example, that GPs make at the moment about whether or not to refer a patient to hospital, given the current pandemic. So again, we can model a number of different scenarios and say to them, in this scenario, would you refer a patient, yes or no, and show them a series of different scenarios. And that will help us to work out referral behaviour at the moment in this pandemic, which is forever shifting. So that's one example. I'm going to hand over to Michelle now to talk through the next block of things.
Thank you, Kate, and hello everyone. This is a slightly different set of kind of ideas that I'm going to introduce you to. So Kate's been talking about some rather quantitative techniques, so where we use kind of attributes and we give people choices. Here we're going to be looking at some qualitative ways of gathering insight, but also involving your population. So probably most of you are aware of qualitative research methods, but just to kind of highlight some of the key attributes of these methods. They are designed particularly to explore individual motivations, attitudes and behaviours. So maybe there's a sort of area of interest that you don't know very little about, and you actually want to kind of go out and explore how people are thinking about whatever it is, or how behaviours are being sort of influenced, or what their attitudes might look like. So in terms of the techniques that we use, we tend to do in-depth interviews, so those are one-on-one interviews, or focus groups, which is a small group of, say, 8 people, and even ethnography, which is a sort of a means of looking into people's lives through a sort of observation lens. The sort of sample size for these kind of research projects tends to be quite small, so we select participants based on the characteristics that we're interested in looking at. So for example, we might do a round of in-depth interviews with people with mental health conditions, for example, and you would fill a given quota. Maybe you'd have some people with certain types of conditions or diseases. You might have some older people, some younger people, some people from different ethnic groups. And really what you're doing is using these methods to delve deeper into exploring a problem, to try and sort of uncover some of the underlying reasons behind what's going on. And you can use them really to help you to expose and also potentially test some solutions. Can you move on, please, Kate? So to give you an example of a project that we ran at Ipsos MORI, this is a big national project. We were approached by the Department of Health and Social Care and also NHS Blood and Transplant, who were carrying out a written consultation around the change in law for organ donation. So what they wanted from us is to explore qualitatively with groups for whom they felt would be less likely to take part in a written consultation, and also those who are more likely to raise issues with the assumed consent model, which, as you probably know, or you should know, because the law has changed already, which is moving from an opt-in to an opt-out system. So we did 26 focus groups. We focused on Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups. We focused on different religious and faith groups, and we also included groups with parents of children, and also those who were temporary residents as well. The nice thing about this piece of work, given how technical it was that we had organ donation nurses who were present at the groups, and they were really there to kind of field sort of very technical questions, and believe me, the public had those. They really wanted to know what happens on the ground when families make decisions about organ donation. We used some fictional case studies to explore and understand the organ donation process, and particularly the role of the family. Really, this research was incredibly helpful to inform the implementation of the opt-out system, but also to sort of make a case for securing some funding around specific outreach work for BAME communities, given that there were particular issues that we found around barriers to donation. Move on, please, Kate. So that's a kind of a run through some qualitative work that you could be doing with your population. And really, as I said, it's about sort of exposing the attitudes, the views and the behaviours, and very sort of exploratory. It's quite focused on individuals at a sort of small scale, and it can be very, very powerful and inform possibly further quantitative research or wider scale population involvement. So now I'm going to kind of introduce you to another technique that we use, which is my background and my expertise. And so, as Karen said at the beginning, I lead our work at Ipsos around public dialogue and deliberation. I have recently successfully transitioned these methods online, which has been challenging. So back in February this year, Kate and I ran a huge programme of work for the One London LICRA, their local health and care record programme. And we had 100 Londoners in a huge space in London over several weekends, in person, you know, lots and lots of people in the room, experts who attended and gave presentations, Ipsos facilitators, note takers, people dropping in and out. And that was absolutely incredible sense of, you know, enthusiasm and excitement. And obviously COVID hit and we had to think about things quite differently. But, you know, we're on it now, we're using Zoom, and we can use very similar sort of online platforms to do very similar things with people So we can still use these methods to explore very difficult dilemmas where there are genuine trade-offs. If you can move on, Kate. So what are deliberative workshops and dialogues? So we tend to use deliberation for involving the public, as I say, in quite difficult dilemmas where decision makers may have very genuine sort of issues which they're facing, where they where the situation isn't straightforward, so it's not a clear-cut solution. They themselves are facing difficulties and challenges with regards to how to sort of solve the situation, and it can be really helpful to get a steer from the public. And it might be very technical, and so the steer from the public may be, you know, a set of kind of underlying values or principles to inform that decision making, or it could be more sort of focused around firm recommendations. For example, you know, local councils are doing climate change assemblies at the moment where it could be, you know, should we do this or that in relation to reaching net zero targets. So tend to do these in much longer sessions, and maybe they're more like day-long events. Online we can't spend quite as long with people. We're tending to have a maximum of around 2.5 to 3 hours, but we just do more sessions, so we'd break up the sessions. But it's a much longer commitment, both from the researcher and the participants. So we tend to involve around 20 to 50 people. So it's a bigger sample compared to the ones that I talked about as examples earlier. And there's a greater focus on exercises and stimulus. As Karen said at the beginning, it's about presenting a range of different views to inform that position and that consensus forming. We can reconvene people. So we often, as we did recently for NHS England Improvement, we had 6 workshops of 3 hours with the same 60 people. So we met them over a series of kind of 4 weeks, and we brought them back, and they continued learning and they continued deliberating before they came to their sort of conclusions at the end and their recommendations. And in dialogue, we tend to use experts. So we might have a very technical, ethical dilemma, for example, around the use of data or around the use of AI or machine learning. And actually it can be very useful to have people who have that expertise are involved in those conversations with the public to answer questions, to prompt and probe around people's attitudes, and to provide some clarity on some very difficult technical subjects. Essentially, we use deliberative workshops and dialogues to get beyond surface level views, which arguably you might only sort of uncover in focus groups. There's more nuanced discussions on some very complex issues, and there are often trade-offs, and we present those to the public and have those deliberated. And the whole process is deepened by sort of the provision of a lot of information broken down, ideally into more sort of digestible chunks, and with the expert contributions as well. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of where we've used these methods in reality. So we did a budget prioritisation deliberation around cancer choices. So we're talking to local residents about the importance of like highly complex area of cancer funding, and we used a full-day deliberative workshop. We had 90 people, reflective of the population of Birmingham, and they were really there to consider a range of kind of presentations, and voting and discussions, budget setting exercises and case studies. And what it came out with was a clear set of criteria and common approaches for decision making to be taken forward, and which was really useful in that situation where there was no clear-cut solution. And the next one, Kate. And an example of a public dialogue. So the UKRI funds a ScienceWise programme, which is UKRI will put in half the money to cover the costs of a public dialogue, and the commissioner will put in the rest. On this occasion, we conducted a dialogue on behalf of Genomics England, so you may well have heard of this. We've got a lot of press coverage. The ex-Chief Medical Officer, Dame Sally Davies, was very kind of keen and really sort of talked about this approach in much excitement, and I think it is really being taken as an exciting way of talking to the public by the NHS too. So this was around bringing members of the public together alongside some pretty technical and ethical sort of specialists in the world of genomics to explore what the public's kind of aspirations, concerns and expectations are around the future of genomic medicine in the UK. We had 9 to 7 people. We reconvened them in person because this was a couple of years ago, and we had workshops in different parts of the country. Obviously, that's a bit different now because we don't necessarily have to focus on location. So online, we can have people from all over the place coming together for virtual workshops. And then 23 of those came together for a sort of convened summit where they were responsible for sort of putting the recommendations forward. Throughout the whole process, there was a real focus on the NHS contract and the social contract and how that might need to change with the introduction of genomics into the UK. But the core principles of reciprocity, I can never say that word, altruism and solidarity remain core to this. So that was a fascinating project. Next, please. So we're going to try this out with you, which is an actual social experiment. I can't say I've ever done it before with a group of professionals, with a group of people who work within the NHS from all different backgrounds, but I'm really hopeful that you're going to enjoy it. We're going to give you an example to actually deliberate shortly, and this is around genome editing. So genome editing is a technique that I will just talk through briefly in a second. Essentially, the project that we did, which was a real-life project, was exploring how the public trade off the benefits and disbenefits of these new technologies and the potential unintended consequences that might arise, because it's very unknown and it's a new methodology in science. So we really wanted to understand the boundaries of acceptability, as well as what kind of reassurances people feel that they need in regards to the use of the technology. So maybe stuff around communication and regulation. And the outcome was a set of principles informing how genome editing should be used, as well as some quite clear red lines for how it shouldn't be used, and expectations around safeguarding communication and regulation. Next, please, Kate. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a patronising, very quick science lesson now, but just so everybody's on the same page, because when we're going to put you in breakout rooms very shortly, and you're going to do a live demonstration of deliberation. And I think without this information, people might not necessarily know what we're talking about. So just to give you a quick lesson. So this is about genome editing. So a genome is a whole set of genes in an organism's DNA, plus all the DNA between your genes. And we have a lot of them in our genomes. And it's a complete set of genetic instructions which allows individuals to grow and develop, and it controls us, if you like, and it's found in the nucleus of the cell. Genes are responsible, as we're learning, for pretty much everything. So from height and weight to all of our inherited traits, and even to diseases as well that we're likely to either get or have a higher risk of getting in the future. Next, please, Kate. So before we go into breakout rooms, just to explain, what you're going to be talking about shortly is genome editing, which is a scientific technique which allows scientists to alter the genes or the genomes of individuals, either by, if you like, sort of chopping around within the genome. So either removing, adding or altering genome to edit out or bring in more desirable attributes to the genome. So we're going to go into breakout rooms now, and you're going to be looking at some future possibilities of using this technique in different contexts. So your facilitators will explain a bit more about that. They're going to choose 6 people at random to have a live deliberation with. If you're chosen and you don't want to do it, just feel free to say that that's the case. But it'd be great if a couple of people were happy to have that live deliberation. Everybody else can have their cameras on, but their mute buttons off, if that's okay. And also, if you feel uncomfortable talking about any of this, given that it could potentially raise discomfort levels, feel free to come back into the main room. Otherwise, we really hope that you enjoy it, and we will see you shortly. Kate, are you going to share your screen again? I think people are still coming back, so I'll just give it a second. We might have lost people as well. Maybe people couldn't stay for the whole duration. Okay, thank you for taking part in that. I hope you enjoyed it. And we just really wanted to give you a kind of an opportunity to actually feel like, to experience what it feels like to be a participant in a quite an ethical, difficult dilemma and topic there. And appreciate you being really honest with your views as well. I know people in my group were fantastic. And we found, I listened into some very similar things that came out when we talked to the public about this area, which was actually really reassuring and great. So typically an output of a deliberation might either be a set of principles, maybe throughout the discussions you're listening out to the things that matter to people most, or the values behind people's sort of reasoning. And we might write some sort of principles which might look like, we expect X, Y, and Z to be borne in mind for decision making, or for genome editing it may be, you know, we expect genome editing to be used in these particular ways but not in these ways. Or we might have an actual sort of set of more firm recommendations. So for example, it could be that a public are invited to make specific recommendations which are much more strict. The NHS must do X, Y, and Z, for example. And just to give you a bit of a flavour, because I know you just gratefully just taken part in a live demo. So some of the principles that were developed at the back of the genome editing project were around sort of a real acceptability with the application, where there's a direct benefit to humans and health. And there was a lot of sort of attraction towards editing out very sort of life-threatening diseases, but not having those passed on through the heritable form. It was completely sort of unacceptable to use it for unnecessary things like cosmetic traits in humans, and then an absolute red line was around heritable editing because of the risk to humans. And there were lots of concerns around the sort of crops and the animal aspect in relation to animal welfare and tampering with natural environment. So these principles that we listened out for became the kind of output from that deliberation. So hopefully that's useful. I'll pass back to Kate now to take us into the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm just going to try and get everybody up. So the last part of examples that we were going to share with you is around measuring experiences and improving services. This is much more kind of traditional, a bit less innovative than the stuff Michelle was speaking about. To focus in on surveys. So you all obviously know what surveys are. There's tons out there designed to measure a whole range of different elements, so experiences, attitudes, behaviours. And when we get sample sizes that are large enough, it also means that we can analyse differences between groups. And that's hugely helpful in terms of providing intelligence, for example, for monitoring or addressing health inequalities. So with the right sample design and the right approach, then surveys do offer a representative insight into the population. Here's a few examples. The GP patient survey has been going for many years now. I think we're on year 15, and it measures a range of different experiences of GP practices. And it's a huge survey. It produces results at practice level, but then that can also be aggregated up to CCG, to PCN, so on and so forth. And one of the big outcomes of the survey have been that although people have continued to be satisfied with GP services, and in particular the care that they've been shown as individuals, satisfaction with access had been declining over years. And that really fed into a narrative within NHS England, which concluded in the extended care pilot. So the idea about having extended hours for GP practices. So the data having been collected robustly has allowed an issue to be identified. A policy has been put in place to address that, but then also we're then able to monitor it over years. So we can see the impact of that policy and see how it's changed and what impact it's having on patients. One of the reasons I wanted to mention the GP patient survey was just to remind people that there is an awful lot of data that exists out there in the world already of this type. So the GP patient survey will give you local level results. There's the CQC suite of inpatient, maternity, etc. surveys, which again produce local level insight. If you're working more in a population health kind of arena, then the Sport England Active Lives survey produces data on physical activity, again down to a very local level. So whenever you're thinking about needing to get insight or basing your decisions on data, it is worth having a look if you get time, which I know is the thing that none of us have, but if you get time to have a look at what's already there to help you to make your decisions. This is from some polling that we did with the Health Foundation very recently. So we've done 2 waves of polling. This is across Great Britain as a whole. And again, it's just an example of how collecting data just provides evidence behind what's actually happening out in the world. So we asked people if they developed a health issue and they felt they needed treatment over the next 3 to 4 weeks, how comfortable or not would they feel using their local hospital or using their GP service? And you can see from the results here that actually people feel much more comfortable in July than they did in May, which I think is what you'd expect. I'd be very interested to know what those findings say now. And also you can see that people are much more comfortable using a GP practice. So 89% of people in July said they'd be comfortable with a GP practice, 77% for their local hospital. Now, we've also heard a lot about how the coronavirus pandemic has affected different groups of people differently. And again, our data has provided evidence behind this. So we also did a booster. So we had a good sample of people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. And that showed, certainly for hospitals, that people from BAME backgrounds do feel less comfortable if they would need to use their hospital. Now, one of the things we had been hearing is maybe people felt reticent about using hospitals or GP practices because they wanted to protect the NHS. They didn't want to add burden to the NHS. They wanted to try and treat themselves before they went to the NHS. We'd been hearing that a little bit, so we decided to measure actually why do people feel uncomfortable, what is driving that? And you can see by a long way that actually they're worried about being exposed to or catching coronavirus. So 72% of people who said they'd feel uncomfortable using their local hospital said that's because they were concerned about coronavirus. So again, that just provides evidence for policymakers. It provides evidence for comms teams. So if you're going to try and address people feeling uncomfortable and not accessing services when they need to, here is incontrovertible evidence that also is backed up by multiple other surveys that this is the area to focus on, persuading people, reassuring them that the NHS is safe. And there's a million ways in which surveys in this way can be used. Another recent one I did was understanding why people at A&E had visited A&E. That was it was actually interviewers stood in A&E department, so definitely pre-COVID. But that kind of evidence can really help policy making. This is our latest COVID testing that we've released today. This is very, very recent data that's been collected from the 18th to the 26th of September. And I just thought I'd share it because it's hot off the press this morning. And actually there's a little bit of good news in there in that from our data, which is based on sending out home testing kits to hundreds of thousands of people across England, that the R number looks like it's dropped down again a bit to 1.1, whereas it was more like 1.7 at the end of August, beginning of September. Another application of that would be, we've been measuring the number of direct contacts people have been having for the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So instantly, when people are starting to socialise more or go back to work, we can see the number of direct contacts increasing. And that then later on feeds through to these more epidemiological studies where you're actually testing people and seeing results. So it's like an early indicator, if you like. So, putting it all into practice, those were some ideas just to stimulate some discussion. I would say the first step when you're thinking about involving your population on any particular project, decision, policy, was that you must have a real clarity of purpose at the centre of it. And then you can devise a strategy. So I think you need to be asking yourself questions like, what decision is this going to feed into? Can the public or can the population that you're speaking to reasonably provide input to help you with this decision? Who is the population that this is going to affect? You know, who is it that you need to be talking to? And I think if you have that real clarity of purpose, you can then work from there to build up what an approach might be to meaningfully involving them. We've already talked about the spectrum between engagement and research, but you can also map out the techniques in this kind of way. So on the horizontal axis here, you've got everything from an invited representative on the right-hand side through to open interest on the left-hand side. And actually, when you plot different techniques against that, you can see that you've got your much more representative type of approach, a census or a survey on the right-hand side, through to the left-hand side where people are very much self-selecting. So instead of going out and inviting somebody who's been selected to be representative, this is people who already have an interest and are self-selecting. Both of those have their purposes, both of those have times when they're useful. So for example, a public meeting for people that are particularly concerned about service change is absolutely part of a toolkit that we can use. However, if you're trying to find out what the population as a whole think about a service change, then you need to head to the right-hand side for a survey. And that's why it's important to really try and define what you're doing before you make your choice about how to do it. And on the vertical axis here, we've got from population down to individual. So again, when you're looking to make a decision or a policy, who is it that you need to involve? Is it a whole population where you need to do something like a survey? Or is it very much more individual level? Are you looking at a pathway that affects quite a small number of individuals and you really want to get those individuals involved in a detailed planning, for example? So this kind of map of techniques can just be used to help you to specify what approach you want to take. So we thought we'd finish with a bit more of a discussion. So if anyone is brave enough to shout up, just whether you've got any challenges at the moment where you think that you could meaningfully involve the population, or if you've got any questions.
Kate, it's Karen here. We've got 3 questions that have been posted since we started.
Okay.
We've got Paul Abraham, Fiona Ball and Alan McKay. So I think Michelle's already messaged me to say that she can answer 2 of them. And I think, Fiona, we might need a little bit more information. So Paul, I don't know if you're still on, if you wanted to pipe up and ask your question.
Yes, I am, after being off in your interactive session for about half an hour because my broadband in deepest, darkest Cornwall's gone off, but there you go, it's a different matter. Yeah, thanks very much for that. It's really interesting. We've got a specific one. Obviously, the assumption you've built in a lot of this is people are willing to engage in surveys and interviews. We've done some work on our sort of respiratory cohort, and we've sort of done a little starting of segmentation, and we've got this group who are sort of not really prepared to engage, whether that's with healthcare, not turning up to their reviews, not going to the practice, just ending up in the emergency department. They're generally depressed, lots of digital inequalities in those areas, and we just can't engage with them. And obviously we need to understand why. And got any suggestions about how we could go about that, really?
Yeah, so I saw your question, and particularly when you reference qualitative research, I think I would have kind of agreed with you there. I think this is a very, very common dilemma that we have, and a problem and challenge that we have to overcome when we are talking to people. So, for example, did a piece of work for the GMC where we were looking at attitudes towards consent and confidentiality, which is in relation to the guidance the GMC puts out for doctors in regards to dealing with those issues. And they wanted to talk to gypsies and travellers, they wanted to talk to people who had experience of detention of by the state, people with severe mental health problems, and asylum seekers and refugees. You can't just find those people like easily. So those were the groups that we wanted to look at, and similarly for the organ donation group, specific faith and ethnicity groups. So what we do at Ipsos is we work closely with recruitment partners, often involving organisations which are advocates or representatives of these groups, and we have to go through those charities and those organisations to access them. Firstly, because it's the only way. Secondly, because of trust and the sort of opportunity to give them a voice and to sort of engage them in a way through and via a trusted representative. You do have to incentivise often with these groups. It helps. You do find that people don't just come because of the money, but often there's kind of links with other kind of issues, maybe sort of financial problems and so on. So incentives do really kind of encourage those kind of groups to engage in research. I think your particular issue, if you were able to identify some of those groups that might be working with those people already, you could probably access them, and they might have suggestions about the kinds of incentives or where you might do the research. And obviously you're going to be doing things on telephone, possibly on video conference, but some people don't have Zoom, or they don't know how to use it. So you could also use them to sort of advocate and help out in the interviews through sort of mediation as well.
It's also something potentially about behavioural theory almost, that you have to pick the right messages that will get them to engage. Now some messages just won't work with many people, but you can try multiple different attempts of help the NHS and pull on that kind of altruistic levers, or you can pull on a kind of help us to help you, and just think through the different behavioural levers that people might go for.
Thank you both. Paul, any response, or shall I move on to Fiona?
No, it's just interesting. We got one of our nurses to try and start talking to one of the patients and got an ashtray thrown at them. So yeah, it's a difficult cohort to work with, and I think that's a good suggestion about going to some groups that may be already involved with them. I suppose it's just trying to find those groups, who they are really.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Paul. So Fiona, are you still on? Fiona Ball?
I am, and I'm going to be really rude and be very, very quick, and then I'm going to have to run away and pick my daughter up from school. So I'm really sorry. I will dial into the recording to hear the response. But the question was really around any tips around engaging groups in a meaningful way in a virtual sort of capacity, because obviously sort of with the lack of face-to-face with where we are with the pandemic at the moment, and if there's any tips about sort of getting the best out of that.
Yeah, so I was going to answer this one as well. I mean, I've assumed that you might have asked the question in relation to, say, for example, using deliberation or sort of workshops, or maybe even focus groups or in-depth interviews. So we have, as I said before, quickly moved our offer online, and that's across all methodologies, surveys included. Where there is more engagement, more sort of in-depth engagement, i.e. it's not just a survey, it's a group discussion, or it's a 3-hour workshop. We're learning and we're building on that. We're starting to learn the best ways to do that and to keep people engaged and to help people. So we've done a lot of onboarding. So we've sent out individual invitations to join, say for example, a Zoom call before the workshop, just so people get comfortable and know what to expect when they come into this environment. And we've given people one-to-one support. We have a lot of people who are digitally challenged and maybe have less confidence or just don't know how to use chat boxes in the way that we all know how to turn themselves off mute and so on. So we provided one-to-one support. We did a project recently for King's College London around resource allocation in the context of COVID, so around sort of allocation of beds, which was an ethically challenging one to talk to the public about. We had a particular skew of the sample of older people for obvious reasons, and we had some people who actually were supported by a member of their family on the workshop, on the virtual workshop. And that was because they were either hard of hearing or they had language, English wasn't their first language. I mean, we had an elderly man who literally had his forehead at the top of the screen and we couldn't see him, but we were kind of talking to his daughter, which was fantastic. And it really made us realise that we have to make this accessible and we have to help people engage. So whether it's about helping them before they come on and supporting them during it, or thinking about doing things differently, in a way that still makes people feel, able to contribute. I think we do have a lot more to learn though, and as I say, even just around the length how many breaks we give throughout a session. It can very much depend on the population that you have and how sort of focused people are throughout, and what you're discussing as well.
We've been doing much smaller groups, I think, haven't we, Michelle? So where in a face-to-face thing you might have 10 people in a group, virtually we're only having 5 to 6 people, because the conversation is different, and for everyone to have a chance to speak, it's strange. Like, why would everybody need more time? But you just do in a virtual setting. And the other thing that we found, that if you try, in a normal workshop we would have plenary sessions where everybody listens to the same information and where the different groups feed back, so that every group can hear what the other groups are thinking. But we found online it's difficult to stay engaged with those when you're looking at a screen rather than being there in real life. So rather than having lots of those plenary sessions, we've done a lot more of the individual group work, so that people are really able to stay engaged.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why we just chose a maximum of 6 of you when we did a demo, because, as Kate says, we have to have much smaller groups when we do things online, where people are talking amongst themselves.
Right, thank you. Fiona had to dash and she said goodbye, but she's going to listen back afterwards. So thank you very much for sharing that. And my last question's from Alan Mackay. Are you still with us, Alan?
But Alan was interested in data on.
Yes, I am. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So my question is, in the context of an NHS that is moving to a digital first, I'm interested in what data is available, what trends are emerging as to the public's attitude and perceptions of a digital first NHS.
Yeah, so I'm going to share a screen with you. I don't know if can you all see that? Yeah. So this is some data, some recent data from a general public poll on comfort and discomfort in using online services, so virtual appointments. So you can see that 62% report being comfortable with having an appointment with a GP virtually, either at home or on the phone, and a similar kind of proportion of 58% within a non-emergency hospital appointment, so maybe a kind of outpatient's appointment. And there is still a kind of a good number of people who are reporting discomfort in this. It's worth also sort of saying that whilst we can't share the specifics, we've just done a huge kind of in-depth deliberation for NHS England Improvement in London to inform the decision makers as they enter the next phase of the pandemic with the principles of Londoners in terms of what matters most to people. And virtual was one of the things that we covered. So I'd love to show you lots of what we came out with there, but I'm not able to, and I think it's going to be published tomorrow, fingers crossed. But essentially, it's a really complicated picture, so it's almost not acceptable to assume that virtual is going to work for everyone. It won't, and that's not even necessarily linked to digital capability. It could be related to the type of appointment or the situation the person is in, which is not to do with being able to converse or take part in a video consultation. So the choice was a really important factor there. So whilst with some of the measures that we talked about, people were sort of more willing to sort of trade off choice or let go of choice. For virtual, this seemed to be really important, and that was from the perspective of clinicians as well. So both patients and clinicians were seen to still have a say in how the appointment takes place. This is really challenging though, because the health service is trying to keep people safe and trying to not mix people face to face, and trying to deliver as much as they can virtually. I think there's appetite for it, and people recognise that it's the direction of travel. It makes sense. We're in a digital age, but it's that worry about sort of safeguarding and really sort of difficult, things that might go unnoticed or misdiagnosis. Mental health problems came up as a prime example there.
Thank you.
The other thing we find in a lot of this work is that the social contract really is alive. So people really do feel like the public, the patients, have got their own part to play, as well as services having their own part to play. And we saw that in virtual, where quite a few people were saying, actually, virtual would be fine for me. And I'm really happy to do that to free up doctors' time so that they can spend more time with people who are more vulnerable.
So has anybody else got any more questions for Kate and Michelle, or even just a little bit of feedback about what you've learned or reflections on this session? Please just unmute yourself and share. No? Okay.
Oh, sorry, Karen. It's Jeanette Fulton here. It's just to say how useful I found it, and I've got lots of ideas that I can take back and try and use in my work in a local authority and share with my team.
Absolutely, I can't agree more. That all the work that we're doing with the public at the moment, you just think of so many ways that you could now approach it.
Yes.
Anybody else?
I was just going to say, as a project manager for PCN, that it's particularly for us, we're working on the early cancer diagnosis at the moment, and I think what we've discussed today, we've got quite an issue with attendance for cervical screening. So I think, you know, because we're a high deprivation area, using external organisations to try and reach patients who are not attending, I think that could be really powerful for us, and it's not something I've thought about. So yeah, absolutely fantastic advice. I just wanted to say, particularly for that is really helpful.
Right, thank you, Lindsay.
Sorry, Karen. I think the other thing that's worth noting there is how much intelligence you might also be able to get from within the system. So from, say, your GPs, your practice nurses who are seeing similar patients, as well as going directly to the patients, which is a great thing to do, but isn't always affordable potentially. There is also a real bulk of information that's being held by health professionals as well, just as an extra in case it's not possible to do the full thing.
Great tips. Anybody else got anything they'd like to share or say? That's interesting. Lots of thanks in the chat box there. I'm just going to share my screen and just remind everybody that we've got a panel discussion coming up tomorrow about what we've learned from the analytical collaboration of COVID-19 so far, with many of the people who participate from the Health Foundation, the Field Trust, King's Fund and the Strategy Unit. And I think there's only 27 of us here. So let's all, if I stop my sharing, let's all put our screens on. Everybody put their screen on. And let's give Kate and Michelle a big round of applause and a massive thank you yeah, that's fantastic. Lovely to see everybody's faces for doing a great hour and a half session. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.